I was sitting in my office on the 14th floor when my assistant knocked and told me a flower arrangement had arrived. No card, just white lilies, which my daughter-in-law knew I hated. I smiled anyway because I knew exactly who sent them and I knew exactly why. My name is Harriet Monroe. I am 63 years old, and for 11 years my only daughter believed I was the reason her father left. She was wrong. But it took a Cadillac Escalade, a $2.4 million real estate portfolio, and the worst graduation ceremony of her life for her to find that out. Let me go back to the beginning, because the story doesn't start with the ending. It starts in a kitchen in Decatur, Georgia, on a Tuesday evening in March, with a phone call I almost didn't pick up. My husband. I'll call him my ex-husband now, though I spent 17 years calling him my partner, my best friend, my person. His name was Franklin. Franklin Monroe. He was a good-looking man with a loud laugh and a way of making every room feel like it had been waiting for him to arrive. I loved that about him for a long time. Later, I understood that the same quality that made him magnetic also made him dangerous. Men like Franklin need an audience, and when the audience at home grows familiar, they find a new one. I didn't know about the other woman for nearly 2 years. I was busy. I was working as a loan officer at a regional bank in Atlanta, raising our daughter Tamara, keeping the house, keeping the family together the way women do, quietly, constantly, without anyone noticing until you stop. Tamara was 12 when I first felt something shift. Franklin started working late, then weekends. Then he took a business trip to Charlotte that I later found out was a long weekend in Savannah with a woman named Cheryl who worked in his firm's accounting department. I found out the way most wives find out. A receipt in a jacket pocket. Hotel bar, 2 glasses of wine, 1 room. I confronted him that same night. He didn't even try to deny it. He sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Harriet, I've been unhappy for a long time." Like his unhappiness was something that had simply happened to him. Like I had given it to him as a gift. We separated. And that part, as painful as it was, I could have survived. Marriages end. Hearts break and heal. What I was not prepared for was what Franklin did next. He sat Tamara down. She was 13 by then, just starting 8th grade, already sensitive and watchful in the way girls that age become. And he told her that I had been the problem all along, that I had been cold, that I had pushed him away, that I had checked out of the marriage years ago and he had stayed out of loyalty to her. He told her I had had my own affair, which was a lie so complete and so deliberate that even now, 15 years later, it still takes my breath away when I think about it. Tamara came home from her father's apartment that Sunday night and would not look at me. I didn't know what he had told her. Not the full version anyway, not for months. I thought she was grieving the divorce. I thought she was angry at both of us, the way kids sometimes are. I gave her space. I gave her time. I kept making her lunches and driving her to school and sitting outside her door when I heard her crying, and she let me do all of those things without once letting me in. By the time she was 15, she was calling Franklin's apartment her real home. By 16, she asked to live there full-time. A family court mediator asked her where she wanted to live, and she said her father's. The mediator noted she was mature and articulate in expressing her preferences. I sat in that room and nodded and said I respected her choice, because I did, because I had to, because the alternative was to fight my own child in a courtroom, and I could not do that to her. Franklin got primary custody. I got every other weekend, and the hollow feeling of driving home alone on Sunday nights. For the next several years, I tried everything. I wrote letters. I called. I showed up to her school plays and her debate tournaments and sat in the back so she would not feel ambushed. Sometimes she acknowledged me. Mostly she did not. Her father had planted something in her, and it had taken root the way only lies told to children can. Deep, silent, unquestioned. I won't pretend I handled all of it with grace. There were nights I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Kroger off Memorial Drive and cried until I couldn't breathe. There were months where I went through the motions of living, going to work, eating, sleeping, without feeling present in any of it. I had a therapist named Doctor. Okafor, who told me that grief without acknowledgement is one of the hardest things a person can carry because there is no funeral, no casserole on the doorstep, no one saying they are sorry for your loss. You just keep losing, quietly, and the world keeps moving. But here's the thing about losing quietly for long enough. Eventually, you get very, very good at surviving. I was passed over for a promotion at the bank in 2017. The position went to a man 12 years younger than me, who had been there for 3 years compared to my 14. I asked my manager for feedback, and he said I was not quite the right fit for the direction we're heading. I went home that night, and I thought about Franklin telling our daughter I had checked out. I thought about the mediator writing down Tamara's preferences in neat handwriting. I thought about all the rooms in my life where the decision had already been made before I walked in, and I decided I was done walking into those rooms. I had been studying for my real estate license on nights and weekends for 8 months. I passed the exam on a Saturday in October. I gave the bank my notice the following Monday. My manager seemed genuinely surprised. I was too, a little. The first year was hard in ways I had not anticipated. I was 60 years old, starting over in a commission-based industry with no existing client network in a city where real estate had become brutally competitive. I got one listing in my first 4 months, a small ranch house in East Point that the sellers had priced $10,000 over market. I talked them down, staged it myself with furniture I borrowed from a colleague, and sold it in 9 days. The commission was not impressive, but I stood in the empty house after the closing and felt something I had not felt in years. I felt capable. I found a mentor named Opal, a 71-year-old broker who had been selling real estate in the Atlanta metro since before I'd graduated high school. She was small and sharp and had no patience for self-pity, which was exactly what I needed. She taught me how to read a neighborhood before the numbers showed the shift. She introduced me to her network. She told me once, over coffee at her kitchen table in Cascade Heights, "Harriet, the women who make it in this business are not the ones who were given a head start. They are the ones who refuse to accept that the race was already over." I wrote that on a note card and put it on my bathroom mirror. It is still there. By the end of my second year, I had closed 17 transactions. By my third year, I had my broker's license and had begun acquiring small investment properties. A duplex in College Park, a fourplex in Smyrna. I reinvested everything. I lived carefully. I drove a 7-year-old Buick and packed my lunch and said no to things that did not move me forward. And slowly, transaction by transaction, property by property, a quiet version of a different life began to take shape. Tamara had graduated from Georgia State with a communications degree in the spring of 2022. I had not been invited. I found out from a cousin who saw photos on Facebook. My daughter in her cap and gown, standing between her father and a woman I recognized as Cheryl, who had apparently been a permanent fixture in Franklin's life for over a decade by then. My daughter was smiling. She looked happy. I zoomed in on the photo 3 times before I put my phone down. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table. I thought about calling her, then didn't. There is a particular kind of discipline required to let someone you love come to you in their own time. I had been practicing it for years. I was not perfect at it, but I had gotten better. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday in January. It was addressed to Mrs. Harriet Monroe, which surprised me. The Mrs. felt like a deliberate choice, pointed in a way I could not quite name. Inside was a printed card on cream stock. Tamara's engagement party at her father's house in Marietta. March 8th. Cocktail attire. My first thought was that it was a mistake. My second thought was that it wasn't. I called my cousin Adele, who is the only person in my family who has remained consistently honest with me about everything. Adele said, "Harriet, something about that invitation doesn't feel right." I told her I knew. She said, "You know Franklin is going to use that party to make a point." I said I knew that too. And here is the part that I want you to understand. I was not afraid. I had been afraid for years. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of my daughter's silences. Afraid of what she thought of me and what Franklin had built inside her mind. But I was standing in my kitchen in January, looking at that invitation, and the fear was simply not there anymore. What was there instead was a kind of clarity. I had spent 11 years becoming someone I was proud of, and not a single moment of that had been for Franklin's benefit, or for Tamara's, or for anyone who had ever dismissed me, or underestimated me, or looked past me in a room. I had done it because it was mine. And whatever happened at that party, whoever was in that room, whatever story Franklin had told about me and the years since our marriage ended, none of it could touch what I had built. I called my assistant. I told her to arrange for a car service, the nicest one we used for client events. I told her what I had in mind. She said, "Oh, I like this." I wore a wool crepe suit in deep burgundy that I had bought in the fall and not yet found occasion to wear. My hair was silver now. I had stopped coloring it 2 years earlier. A decision that had felt radical at the time and now felt simply correct. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and heels I could actually walk in. I looked, if I may say so, like a woman who had long since stopped needing anyone's approval. The car service sent a black Cadillac Escalade with a driver named James who shook my hand and called me Ms. Monroe, and held the door. I know that might seem like a small thing. It did not feel small thing. It did not feel small. We pulled up to Franklin's house in Marietta at 7:15. The house was lit up, cars lining both sides of the street. I could see people through the front windows, cocktail glasses in hand. I sat in the back of that Escalade for exactly 3 seconds and took a breath. Then I got out. I heard the shift before I saw it. The particular silence that moves through a crowded room when something unexpected walks in. Franklin was near the fireplace with a glass of bourbon. He saw me, and I watched his expression move through surprise and then something harder. Something that wanted to rearrange itself into control and couldn't quite get there. Cheryl was beside him. She had the look of a woman who had prepared for many scenarios and not this one. Tamara was across the room with her fiancé, a young man I had never met, and when she turned and saw me, the color changed in her face. I want to be very honest about what happened in my chest in that moment, because it was not triumph. It was grief. It was the same grief that had been living in me since she was 13 years old and stopped looking me in the eye. It was the grief of a mother looking at her child across a room full of people and knowing that the distance between them is measured in years and lies and things that cannot be easily undone. But I had come this far, and I was Harriet Monroe, so I smiled. I moved through the room the way Opal had taught me to move through a listing appointment, like I was the one who had called the meeting. I introduced myself to people I didn't know. I congratulated a woman near the kitchen who I gathered was the fiancé's mother. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and held it the way my grandmother had held her good china, like it was ordinary and precious at the same time. Franklin reached me before Tamara did. He pulled me slightly to the side toward the hallway and said in a low voice, "I don't know what you think you're doing here." I said, "I was invited." He said, "This was a courtesy." I looked at him. I thought about the 17 years I had spent in this man's orbit, the loan applications I had processed in my first week back at work after Tamara was born, because we needed the income, the casseroles and the school projects and the long nights, the way he had sat at our kitchen table and talked about his unhappiness like it was weather, like it was something that had simply arrived. I said, "Franklin, I'm here to see my daughter. That's all." He walked away. And I think that was the first time in our entire relationship that I had the last word. Tamara found me by the back windows about 20 minutes later. Her fiancé, his name is Wendell, and he seemed to me like a genuinely kind person, the kind of quiet, steady man I had once hoped she would find, had his hand on the small of her back and then discreetly stepped away when she approached me. She said, "I didn't think you'd actually come." I said, "Where else would I be?" She was looking at me differently than I remembered. There was something working behind her eyes. She said, "You look..." And then she stopped. I waited. She said, "Dad told me you weren't doing well. After everything." I let that sentence sit between us for a moment. I said, "I'm doing all right, Tamara." She looked at my suit. She looked at the car she had seen through the window when I arrived. She looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in a very long time. And I saw the moment when some small, stubborn piece of the story she had been given, began to loosen. She said, "I have some things I think I need to say to you." Her voice was careful, tight. "Not here, not tonight. But I think I owe you a conversation," I said. "I've been waiting for it." She nodded. Wendell came back and shook my hand and said he had heard a lot about me and was glad to finally meet me. I liked him immediately. I told him he was welcome in my home any time. I left the party at 9:30. James was waiting at the curb. I got into the back of the Escalade and sat there for a moment before he pulled away, watching the lit windows of Franklin's house. I did not feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. Victory implies a competition, and I had stopped competing the day I handed the bank my resignation and decided to build something that was only mine. What I felt was simpler than victory and harder to name, something that lives on the other side of a very long night. Tamara called me 3 weeks later. She asked if she could come by. I said yes, and then I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a long time before I started cooking. She came on a Sunday afternoon in April. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table I had sat at alone for 11 years, and she told me what Franklin had said to her when she was 13. All of it. The affair he invented, the coldness he described, the way he had shaped her understanding of me before she was old enough to question it. She said, "I was so angry at you for so long, and I think I was also just afraid. If I let myself believe that you were who I thought you were, I would have had to look at who he was, and I wasn't ready for that." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry, Mom." That was the first time in 11 years she had called me Mom. I am not going to tell you that everything was repaired in that conversation. It wasn't. 11 years of distance does not dissolve in a Sunday afternoon, no matter how much both people want it to. We have had hard conversations since then, and we will have more. There are things she is still processing about her father and what he did. There are things I am still learning about how to be her mother again after so long. But she calls me now. We have dinner twice a month. She asked me to sit in the front row at her wedding this past October, and I wore a champagne-colored suit and my grandmother's earrings, and I did not cry until Wendell read his vows, and then I cried a lot. Franklin was there too, of course. He sat 3 rows back with Cheryl. He looked older than I remembered. I thought about saying something to him, but I realized I had nothing left to say. Some people I have carried as resentments for years and slowly set down. Franklin, I had simply run out of room for. Opal came to the wedding as my guest. She held my hand during the ceremony and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. Afterward, at the reception, Tamara found me at my table and leaned down and whispered something in my ear. She said, "I showed Wendell your portfolio. He wants to know if you're taking new investor clients." I laughed. I laughed until the people at the next table turned to look. I told her to have him call my office Monday morning. There's something I want to say to anyone who is where I was 11 years ago. Sitting in a parking lot, crying in a car, watching a version of your life disappear and having no idea what comes next. I don't have a formula for surviving it. I'm not going to tell you to stay positive or that everything happens for a reason, because some of it doesn't happen for a reason. Some of it just happens, and you have to stand in the wreckage and figure out where to put your feet. What I can tell you is this. The version of me that exists today, the broker, the property owner, the woman who walked into that party in Marietta and held her sparkling water like it was ordinary and precious, she was not built in spite of what Franklin did to me. She was built alongside it, in the hours before work and after work, in the evenings at Opal's kitchen table, in every room where someone had already decided who I was before I got there. I decided differently, and eventually, so did my daughter. That is the whole story. That is all of it. My name is Harriet Monroe. I am 63 years old. I have $2.4 million in managed real estate assets, a broker's license, a mentor who is turning 74 in June and refuses to retire, a daughter who calls me mom, and a son-in-law who is, frankly, too good for all of us. I am sitting in my office on the 14th floor, and the lilies, even the white ones, look beautiful from up here. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since that Sunday afternoon when Tamara sat at my kitchen table and told me everything, not in an abstract way, in a very specific, quiet way. The way you think about things when you finally have the full picture and you can trace every line back to where it started. Franklin made a choice when he sat our 13-year-old daughter down and filled her head with a version of me that wasn't true. That was his choice. And it had consequences that stretched across 11 years and touched everything: her childhood, her relationship with me, the way she learned to understand loyalty and truth, and what it means to trust someone who is supposed to love you. You cannot plant that kind of story in a child and expect it to stay small. It doesn't stay small. It grows into the walls of who they become. And I made choices too. I made the choice to stay quiet when every part of me wanted to fight. I made the choice to show up to her school plays and sit in the back row even when she looked through me. I made the choice in October of 2017 to stop waiting for someone else to decide what my life was worth. Those choices had consequences too. A broker's license, a duplex in College Park, 17 transactions in a single year, a fourplex in Smyrna, an office on the 14th floor. What I want to say about ethics, about the actual practice of living with integrity when nobody is watching and nothing is being rewarded, is that it is not glamorous. It does not feel meaningful in the moment. It feels like packing your lunch instead of eating out. It feels like studying for an exam at 10 o'clock at night when you are 60 years old and your feet hurt. It feels like sitting in a parking lot and crying and then starting the car and driving home anyway. The ethics of a life well lived are almost entirely invisible from the outside and entirely visible from the inside, and you have to be willing to be your own witness for a very long time before anyone else shows up to confirm what you already know about yourself. Opal used to say that intelligence is not about knowing more than other people. It is about being honest about what you don't know and then going and learning it. I didn't know real estate when I started. I didn't know how to read a shifting neighborhood or structure an investment property acquisition or build a client network from nothing at 60 years old. I knew I didn't know. That turned out to be enough of a foundation. The thing about resilience, and I say this as someone who genuinely had to find out what she was made of, is that it doesn't announce itself in advance. You don't get to know ahead of time that you are going to be the kind of person who survives something. You find out by surviving it. And then, if you are paying attention, you find out that what you built during the surviving is sturdier than anything you had before. Tamara calls me twice a week now. She asked me last month if I would look at a property she and Wendell are thinking about buying. I told her I would, and then I pulled the comps and the inspection history and the neighborhood trend data before she even sent me the address, because that is who I am now, and I am not going to apologize for it. I am 63 years old. I have made mistakes and been wronged and sat in parking lots and started the car and driven home. I have built something I am proud of entirely on my own terms. And my daughter calls me mom. That is the whole of it. That is everything.